the holographic projection of a deep blue sky, and the real alien grass covering the ground almost made Sarah feel like she was on a planet, not a spaceship. While the women were distracted by watching a small group of the unicorns frolic about 30 meters away, they failed to notice the blue, pink, and gold mass approaching until it was too late. Hey, wait. What? Oh. Sarah had to halt her instinct to violently swing her hand back at the massive fuzzy object that had just knocked it away from the small satchel-like purse she was wearing. As she looked down to see what had just hit her, her vision was almost filled with a giant, single-horned, furry head that was trying to get into her purse. Up close and personal like this, the actual facial structure of this unicorn-like creature was much more similar to an elk than a horse. Though the thick golden mane which fully surrounded its neck mildly gave that impression from afar, the beast's frame was built more like a workhorse than a wild animal. As Sarah turned to pull her purse away from the curious unicorn, it tried to resist by tightly gripping the purse with its lips. Before she could even react, the steed turned its head into a more upright position and smacked the human's arm with its sheathed and padded horn. "Hey, knock that off," Mia blurted out as she stepped over, grabbed the unicorn by ornate leather sheath harness protecting its horn, and pushed up while tilting down with her wrist. "What do you think you're doing, huh? What did I say about trying to take people's stuff, Shakti?" With a tug, Sarah yanked the purse free from the loosened grip of the steed with enough force to make her take a step back. After a quick inspection for damage to the purse, and trying to brush away some of the moisture from the animal's mouth, she was once again lost in wonder as she looked at the animal that Maya Corva was trying to manhandle. Though the unicorn had tried to steal Sarah's purse with quite some force, it was now hardly resisting against the Quistar's control. "What did you say his name was?" Sarah finally let out after staring at the display of dominance a bit too long. Her name is Shakti," Mia replied with the same clicking sound as she pronounced Zichu clicky, and she brought the beast's head in closer to scratch behind its ear. "She's a good girl, just feisty sometimes." "Damn," Sarah muttered under her breath, which drew a questioning glance from the Quistar. As Sarah approached the larger woman, who was now petting the massive unicorn, she noticed the look and clarified with a humorous tone. "Mick, bet me 100 that your language had a click sound like that in it. Now I owe him money, that bastard. May I ask a personal question?" Mia Corva looked down at Sarah as the human came closer and pulled a slice of a red-skinned, white-fleshed fruit from the purse. "Actually, I have 2 questions. First, what is that?" "This?" Sarah asked, while holding up the fruit to the curious eye of both Mia and Shakti. "It's an apple slice. I already had it checked, and it's totally safe for them." With a slightly apprehensive nod, Mia gently took the apple slice from Sarah's hand and offered it to the unicorn. Without a moment's hesitation, the beast bit into the fruit with a sharp crunch and then took the rest from Mia's hand with its lips. Though the way it took the apple showed enough delicate precision to seem almost refined, the enthusiastic way it ate was far less dignified. Its wide-set eyes rolled back into its head slightly, and several delighted, but guttural, noises came from its throat. The creature even did a short, yet adorable, dancing trot in place, after swallowing in order to celebrate the tasty treat. As for the second question, what exactly is your relationship with Mick? Mia Corva finally asked the question that had been on her mind for the better part of a week now. "It's complicated," Sarah said flatly in hopes the response would give the impression she didn't want to talk about that, especially now that a few of the other unicorns had taken notice of the treat dance and were slowly making their way over towards the women. I presumed as much. Despite the difference in use of some tones between the two species, Sarah could tell Mia was going to press further. But the vagueness with which you both described your history makes some of your interactions puzzling. Why, yeah? Asking. Huh? Yeah? Interested? Sarah blurted out the snarky question to deflect, without even thinking about the implications. Though Sarah hadn't specifically asked who Mia was interested in, the Scotswoman had assumed it would have been Mick. However, the way the Quiztar's freckles lit up slightly as she shot her eyes away from Sarah for a moment suddenly gave the ginger doubt about that assumption. After a second of silence, Sarah started talking to avoid any awkward tension from building. Well, like I said, it's complicated. I'm not even really sure where to start, if I'm being totally honest with y'all. Sarah's voice held hints of remorse as she reached into her purse to pull out more apple slices for the approaching steeds. How did you two meet? Mia asked, in a respectful but direct tone to give Sarah a jumping-off point. Even that's complicated. The redhead admitted with a small laugh. It was kind of a double assignment. I really did go to Chaosu to get my management degree in certs. But I was also working for Sid as an intelligence asset at the university. It was the only way I could afford the transit costs. A spy at a school? As a military diplomatic officer, and technically part of the intelligence corp of the Quiztar Armed Forces, Mia Corva wasn't shocked by that revelation. However, she did try to make it sound like she was. Why would a military intelligence organization need to have operatives in a school? If I told ya that, I'd have to kill ya. Sarah shot Mia a semi-serious look before she winked and went to feed one of the newly arrived steeds. I see your intelligence agencies are a bit more. The expression on the Quiztar's face implied she understood both the joke and real implications. Let's say, more aggressive than mine. Sure. The doubt in the rebuttal was obvious, but Sarah wasn't actually sure if the other woman was lying or not. But anyways, I didn't even know who he was when I met him. I just thought he was some goofy metalhead who could manhandle a bass like it was fiddle. I didn't realize he was the president of Aram's grandson. Oh. I wasn't aware that he was from a powerful family. Mia commented with surprise in her voice. He doesn't really seem like that. That's because he's not. Sarah snidely retorted. His Gramps just happens to be a really good president, and people keep voting for him. Hell, I even voted for the old man once. The plaque on his office just says Old Man River. He's actually a really good guy. Sounds like acting as a spy against him would have been difficult. There was a somber tone in the reply. Oh, you have no idea. As Sarah began to explain, the human's tone went in a far different direction than Mia had expected. The absolute mad lad looked at all the spy shit like some kind of game. As long as people played by certain rules. He just sort of thought it was funny. Excuse me? The thought of a leader casually allowing hostile intelligence services to operate so freely was shocking. He was just totally fine with spies at his school. And one even forming a relationship with his grandson? Well, he didn't know I was a spy. At that point, At least I don't think so. Sarah had never really put much thought into when exactly her cover was blown, and had mostly spent the past 4 years trying to forget it all. So, Mick was a musician. Mia Korva tried to pull the topic back to what she was more personally curious about. And that's what attracted you to him? My translator contextualized a bass as a string instrument intended for deep tone. Oh, yeah. Mick's got a huge 7-string. I'm actually kind of curious what it'll sound like now that he's got that metal arm. Even though Sarah tried to make a joke, and she was currently living out her childhood dream of feeding a unicorn, she couldn't stop herself from thinking about the one thing she didn't want to. I actually tried to ask him about his arm. Most of the cybernetics I have seen in the galaxy are far less. Mia was looking for a polite way to say that she was thinking. They're more covert and subtle. Yeah, I think that's just Mick. He could have just had synth skin installed. There's even cloning tech, and he could have just had a new arm grown and attached. Sarah noticed the larger woman wince slightly at that last part. I think he likes it like that, kinda that 2100 cyberpunk aesthetic, part metal, part flesh. Oh, please, stop. Taller and more intimidating-looking woman was noticeably flustered at that thought. I bet he can even take it off and put it back on. The ginger added with a cheeky grin. What do I have to do to get you to stop? The Quistar sounded equal parts grossed out and defeated as she pulled her arms in tightly and rolled her neck. You can take me for a ride on one of these. Sarah had a coy look on her face as she looked up into the larger woman's crimson-red eyes. Be not afraid. A multitude of synthesized voices called out to the darkened room as a holographic projection of a ball of red-feathered wings began to unfurl to reveal a series of concentric spinning rings covered in eyes. That's an ophonym crossed with a seraphim, not archangel, Sarah rebutted with a snark and overly correcting tone. Come on, Gabriel. You know better than this. Hey, I thought it was funny. Mick tried to come to the AI's defense. How ya doing, Gabe? Long time no see. The pair of humans were comfortably seated in the small, private conference room. They had convened in at the request of the AI, acting as the mediator for the Sol system's running Cold War. After the extraterrestrial first contact probes had entered the Sol system, Gabriel had hacked his way into them as if they were a potential threat. However, upon finding the compassionate, if incredibly overwhelming presence of the Hammers controlling AI monitoring the drones, Gabriel quickly realized there was no point retaining an aggressive posture, even though he knew that this incoming alien presence could be a danger. The human-made AI quickly understood the sheer difference in potential and decided against provoking the newcomer. All he requested was to hear from humans on board the alien ship in order to verify their health and safety and to get their perspectives on the situation. Nah, kinda bummed my joke. Didn't work. The wings of the hologram seemed to droop slightly while the rings slowed. But thank you for the setup, Tylon. I really appreciate it. The many eyes of the hologram had looked up for a moment, while saying that part but redirecting towards the humans. Anyways, I'm glad to see you're both alive and well. I had feared young Mikhail had simply found a new way to convert matter to energy. Such little faith. Mick's retort caused the many eyes of the hologram to roll. Oh, Hardy, har har. The many voices made a mocking sound before the wings began to fold back into themselves. Suddenly, the hologram flashed into an orb of light, and then reformed into a human wearing white and blue robes, and sporting a pair of wings. The expression on its face looked incredibly kind, as it continued speaking with all of its voices merged into a single calming one. But I really, truly am glad to see you two alive and well. I am also thrilled at the prospect of having help babysitting your respective governments. Have either of them tried to pull any shite while we were out? Sarah chimed in. Not yet. And I hope they don't. The holographic angel had a somber tone, as it made the motion of taking a seat into a chair that wasn't actually there. But I can tell you that as soon as I passed on your messages and the rest contact protocols, some very important people began rushing to some very private meeting places. Well, that's good to hear. Mick had a note of confidence in his voice. Maybe Ani will be smart about this and take the deal. Oh, my young Mikhail, I cherish your good intentions. The angelic tone of the holographic being implied true admiration, but its expression betrayed that. And I wish it were that simple. Oi, even I thought it was a good deal. Sarah interjected in Mick's defense. They'd be daft not to take it. It is objectively the smart decision to make. The artificial being confirmed with the same conflicting pair of tone and expression. However, you must remember that many people do not live in an objective world. Their world is relative. There are some in Ani who still refuse to recognize Marsgov's legitimacy and right to sovereignty. So what? Mick rebutted. So, the AI showed no hints of irritation in its voice or expression and simply maintained both. Well, I have heard some whispers that Ani may simply try to unilaterally declare Marsgov as illegal and claim ownership of all assets, including the assets you have recently acquired. I'd like to say. Mix was about to shout a retort before the AI hologram cut him off, while turning its gaze upwards again. I appreciate it, Tylon, but that isn't really helpful in this particular situation. Gabriel's tone had shifted slightly from that of a parent talking to its adult, but naive child to that of a subordinate, acknowledging a superior. Any claims they make would only be on paper, and they would be unable to actually enforce them. If I may add some context, the booming voice of the Hammer's AI called out. Please do. Sarah commented before Mick could start ranting. According to Galactic Community Council law, Tylon's voice somehow carried much more authority than Gabriel's as it spoke. If any government seeks to confiscate the property of a citizen of another government who is not in violation of any recognized GCC laws, even if that confiscation is just on paper, that government is to be considered as engaging in piracy and will be treated as such. Oh, fuck, Sarah muttered under her breath, while Mick was stunned silent for a moment. I believe the individuals who crafted these particular first contact protocols were aware of this possibility. The Hammer's controlling AI continued to explain with just a hint less intensity in his voice. There is an entire section devoted to galactic laws concerning intraspecies conflict. Though that is an area of politics the GCC usually abstains from, especially with first contact species. This situation is rather unique. Too much money and too many guns involved. Mick asked in a way that implied the answer was a yes. No, actually, Gabriel countered with his more parental tone. As he continued to give context, however, his tone and expression both became far more somber. I believe their concerns are more to do with the extremes your political systems have gone to. From what I've been able to parse through so far, neither of your systems seem to have good outcomes. Based on the histories of similarly inclined species, my interventions into your affairs have been staving off the more violent forms of collapse. There are over 200 recognized species who have ascended to the galactic stage, and hundreds more who are intelligent but bound to their planets. Tylan added in a way that implied he was about to give some very sad context. However, there have also been hundreds who have gone extinct at their own hands. Some of the ascended species that currently exist are simply the remnants of ruined civilizations. One such species would be the Arnhelians, who are known as quite prolific slavers and generally considered to be a problem for most other species. Fuck, Sarah weakly replied, while Mick slowly leaned over towards her. Hey, you think Tenz's people would take us in? Mick half whispered in a joking tone towards the woman. Not funny. She smacked his shoulder as he quickly began to lean back. But seriously, what does that even mean? It means the Nishnab will likely step in to assist in mediation and help direct your governments down a less self-destructive path, Gabriel clarified. However, the mixture of relief and confusion on the faces of both humans implied he needed to explain more. From my reading of galactic laws, as abductees, they have certain legal rights regarding both the Sol system and Earth. Like what? Sarah's tone had suddenly become defensive as she blurted out the question. I get they're humans and they were abducted, but shouldn't Earth's government have absolute control over Earth? Mick's voice sounded like he was pondering something as he leaned deep into the well-cushioned chair and began stroking his beard. Oi, got something to say, Professor? The redhead chided towards the man while shooting him an incredibly dirty look. Oh, just thinking about Tenz and his uncle, Mick replied after seemingly snapping out some deep thoughts. If the other Nishnab are as chill as they are, it should be fine. Like, I'll bet they just try to help us find some kind of middle ground, while making sure we don't tear each other's hair out. That would be my hope. Gabriel's voice now had a hint of relief in it. I have some interactions scheduled with their AI assistant, Mazer, soon. We'll be working through the details of the swap over, so I can get a vacation to the Nexus. However, they seem to have implied a hands-off approach and are not seeking to enforce any claims they may be legally entitled to. They better not, Sarah muttered under her breath. Hey, speaking of the Nexus, Mick blurted out as someone very important popped into his thoughts. Any word from Espen yet? Oh, yes. She is truly impressive. Tylan's voice sounded almost like it was in awe. I don't want to ruin the surprise, but I will give you a hint. The quantum processing cores, Nan, in constructing on your new ship to house. Her consciousness are, well, let's just say they are quite unique. The Gardens of Deathworlders, Part 13. And this one gets kind of dark in the second halves. So yeah, this is your warning. How did you cook this meat to make it so? Axika was struggling to find the right words to describe what she was tasting. It's rich, tender, flavorful, slightly sweet, and something else. Buttery. Butchery. Mick replied, with pride clear in his voice. I used a lot of butter and garlic when I seared it, then a lot more when I broiled it. The garlic makes it slightly sweet, but it's the butter that really kicks it up a notch. Is it real butter? Where'd ya even get it? Sarah's question came through muffled as she was still savoring a particularly juicy bite of steak. You aren't gonna believe this. Mick's grin grew a bit coy, and he hoped she would get the reference without completing it. Do I even want to know what butter is? Tens asked, while watching some of the oil drip from the bite at the end of his fork. It's another dairy product, but this is a synthesized version of it, also perfect copy though. The Martian clarified, before taking another bite. As soon as Mick said that, both Tens and Axika shot each other questioning glances. The grand buffet they were treated to the night before had been incredibly delicious, with Axika having found a new love for cheese and ice cream. However, no amount of lactase and digestive enhancers could completely offset the amount of dairy she had consumed. Though Axika didn't want to discuss the details, it was obvious her digestive system wasn't adapted to that kind. Despite the aftermath later on in the evening, the delicacies had all been so good, she couldn't refuse the invitation for an afternoon tour and dinner on Mick's ship, assuming she could safely consume the food. The slightly modified diner table. The four were all seated, remained quiet for an awkward second as the oddly paired couple hesitated to continue eating. Don't worry, it doesn't have lactose or anything like that in it, Mick commented after seeing the look they were giving each other. And y'all ate so much cheese and ice cream at the buffet that it would give an avid milk enthusiast stomach problems. I was about to say. Tens's voice had a building laugh. If this is anything like the dairy from yesterday, my future would include me gripping onto a toilet for dear life. Speaking of future activities, Akshika quickly changed the subject while using the side of her fork, rather than her knife, to cut another bite out of the incredibly tender meat. After seeing this vessel of yours, I am quite curious as to your plans for your new one. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. The expression on the bearded man's face implied he had lots of ideas, but hadn't finished thinking through any of them. Not gonna let Yarda borrow it, are ya? Sarah chimed in with a note of genuine concern in her voice. Nah, fuck that guy. He and I had a pretty big falling out after I got out of the hospital. Mick's smile had all but disappeared at the mention of his dad. Asshole thought me getting hurt would make me join his bullshit crusade. Ah. Sarah suddenly regretted her question. Don't worry about it. Mick let his smile come back, though it seemed to be hiding something. We'll talk about that later. But right now, I want to talk about giant spaceships. Speaking of, how do you use your quite impressive vessel, Admiral? Didn't Mia or Tarky explain all that during your tour? Sarah blurted out, while Axika was still savoring the bite steak she had just put in her mouth. Well, they didn't give me a tour, Mick admitted while shooting Tens a nod. Homeboy gave me one when we were high as shit a few days ago. Suddenly, his demeanor completely changed as he quickly looked back and forth between Tens and Axika. I didn't just rat you out to the missus, did I? Ha! Tens blurted out while Apsika covered her mouth as she giggled slightly. She's the Admiral. She's got cameras everywhere. I neither professionally care nor personally care if Tens gets intoxicated on his personal time. The Questar added after quickly, swallowing the bite she had been savoring. Her tone even seemed to imply she would be participating if she were in a position to do so. I trust that he is a mature enough adult to act responsibly, despite how young he is. There was a moment of pause where both Mick and Sarah's expressions became befuddled by the way Akshika referred to Tens as young. To someone that didn't know the difference between human and Questar aging, it would have been easy to assume that all four people seated together were roughly the same age. Though Mick had come to learn he was a few years younger than Tens, it would have been fair to assume the Martian was the oldest person in the room. Sarah, who was the same age as Mick, but lacked the same obvious facial scars and wrinkles, didn't even have the same youthful demeanor and appearance as Tens. For Akshika, her rather sharp and toned features made her appear just as young and spry as her significant other. Hearing Akshika refer to Tens as in that way was not something either of them expected. Young as in years since birth. Seeing the look she was getting, Akshika tried to explain the best she could with her limited understanding of biology. Your species ages much faster than mine, especially during the prime of your life. I turned 57 this year, but I won't start losing my strength for another decade or two. And I could easily live another 70 years if I stay in good health. And since I'm 34, I'd be lucky to live another 70 years. Tense jokingly added, You fucking better. Akshika's voice sounded harsh for a second as reached over and pulled Tens into a side hug and kissed the top of his head lovingly. Da? Sarah cooed at the affectionate display before turning back to Mick. But wait, yeah, seriously, you didn't see all the shite this ship has on it? It's like a full-on colony station just covered in guns. I mean, we saw it. Mick shrugged and gave her a blank look. And it gave me a bunch of ideas to work from. I wanted to ask for some practical personal advice from someone who runs a ship like the one I'm getting. Well, if you want my personal advice, Akshika spoke in a way that implied she would enjoy sharing that information as she slowly peeled herself from Tens. The first thing you need to do is establish your mission. If you don't know what you want to use a ship like that for, it'll just become a useless money pit. For example, the Hammer's mission is to act as a mobile fortress and base of operations for my matriarch's fleet. He was specifically built with features in mind to accommodate that mission. Yeah, all that sounds pretty important, Sarah commented before squinting slightly and staring at Mick. What kind of features did ya ask that robot guide to build, yeah? Huh? Right now it's just the spine, hull, and basic backbone infrastructure. Mick innocently replied. It'll have the automated production facilities to build it up, however. I want later, though. Did you have anything specific in mind? Akshika's question carried a curious amusement. I think it would be really cool to have it be an extension of Kawasu. Mick leaned back in his chair and began stroking his beard. Here's what I was thinking. It'll have a bigger habitation and amenities section than the Hammer, but that'll also include a bunch of classroom facilities. More science stuff and places set up for students to do experiments safely. And, of course, A huge-ass forest running through the whole thing. But how would you generate revenues to pay for overheard? Akshika quickly followed up. However, judging by Mick's sudden change in expression, he hadn't considered the Admiral's pointed question. You have to take into account expenses such as crew costs, maintenance, upkeep, expenditures, and anything else that can come up. A ship like that can be self-sustaining, but not without careful planning and consideration. Yeah, Mick, tell us how you're gonna pay for it, well. Sarah chided with a mocking tone. I hadn't really thought about that, he replied, while resuming stroking his beard. Oi, tell me this then. What video game yeah get this harebrained idea from? The ginger poked him on the shoulder, while he turned his head to shoot her a glare. TV show, actually. Mick couldn't help but let a smile peek through. The one I tried to get you to watch with me for a while. Anime? Of course, you fucking dweeb. The ginger's overly dramatic reaction and insult that didn't properly translate caused Tens to instinctively start chuckling. I have to admit, Tens's voice became slightly excited as he thought about the potential. Having a school in space where you could actually go and see the stuff you're learning about would be way better than anything I've ever heard of. That idea certainly does have some interesting possibilities, Akshika commented, while her mind ran through the logistics of that mission profile. It would certainly be possible to run an operation like that, assuming profit was not an objective. It may even become profitable, depending on how much you charge the students, of course. I mean, I'd want it to be free, Mick said, to the shock and confusion of everyone else at the table. You like how Kaosu is free? Oh, so kind of free. But not really, Sarah rebutted, while using air quotes when she said free. What do you mean by free in this context? Tense asked the question that both he and Akshika were thinking, but Sarah already knew. It mostly gets paid for by tax revenues and donations. Tense half clarified. Everyone pays for the education of the next generation because they had their education paid for by the previous one. Except if aren't a Marsgov citizen, Sarah explained with a tone that implied personal experience in the matter. Then gotta pay out the arse just to get there. Sure, tuition is free. But still gotta pay for room and board, and all that other shite. That'll cost an arm and a leg. I mean, there are loan forgiveness and work-study programs. Mick half defended his university. But I was thinking something a bit more galactic scale. Oh. Akshika's voice suddenly became far more interested in all this. Wait. Like, an intentionally interspecies school? Tense was almost bouncing in excitement over the idea. There's only a handful of those, and they're all incredibly prestigious. Oh, that's a thing already. Mick almost sounded disappointed at the easily predictable revelation that he wasn't the first to want to put such an idea into practice. Yes, I graduated from such an institution. Akshika sat up a bit straighter in her chair to give this explanation the proper respect it deserved. I was at the top of my class at the Grand Military Academy of Muilil University. Though the university existed for several hundred years before my species' ascension. We ultimately opened our enrollment to more and more species over time. It now operates as a fully interspecies institution, which is primarily funded by various GCC members and accepts applications from the entire GCC. It took a few centuries to make all the proper accommodations for the less abled, but it was worth the costs. Wait, like disability accommodations? Sarah's tone implied that the question was touching on something personal. We don't like to phrase it like that when it comes to other species. Tense interjected and used the word we to imply the Nishnag, but not necessarily the Quiztar. A Kayamayak isn't disabled just because they struggle to move on a Shkegpiwan or can't physically speak our language. It's almost twice the gravity they evolved under, and they have a different anatomy. However, some of the accommodations can be similar. But on Shkegpiwan, for example, there are separate, more thorough accommodations we make for people who are genuinely disabled. What do ya mean by that? Though Sarah was slightly suspicious at the implications, the tone of Tenz's voice seemed to denote genuine compassion. It depends on the person and their individual needs. But, like with my cousin Kayet, you remember him, right, ATX? Tenz briefly turned to Axika, who responded with a nod and pleasant smile. Oh, sweet young man. Very compassionate with animals, she added, in a considerate but slightly off tone. Just a bit. He's 40 now, but he still very much has the mind of a child. Like a 6-year-old child. But he loves animals, so we found a way for him to really feel like he's part of society while working with animals. As Ten spoke, it almost looked like Sarah was holding back tears. He works for the Wildlife Conservation Council and puts in more hours than almost anyone else there because it's what he truly loves doing. They just make sure he isn't around animals that can hurt him or that he could accidentally hurt. And because he works so much, he has more money than he knows what to do with. I love it, Nick replied, while Sarah was still speechless. Sadly, I don't think we have anything on Earth, or even Mars, that's quite like that. I'm glad. Yeah, confess up that? Yeah, ain't perfect over there? Sarah quickly caught her snarky comment and continued in a much more considered wah. But yeah, both our governments should really do more for the less able. Out of everyone, they deserve government assistance the most. To be fair, it isn't really our government doing anything. It's just people. Tenz tried to clarify, however, this only brought on confused expressions. The government doesn't really treat him differently from anyone else. There's no special status or anything like that. People just do what they can to help people like him be happy and contribute to the whole. Like I've said before, there's also something to do, even if it isn't absolutely essential. See, we have a vaguely similar concept, but I think there's one big difference. Mick's tone had suddenly become very academic, as he carefully tried to change the topic away from something he knew Sarah was sensitive about. We don't do things because they necessarily make us happy or contribute to society and the universe around us. We do things simply because they generate wealth. Well, there's nothing wrong with generating wealth. Akshika interjected a bit too defensively. My fleet does operate on a for-profit basis for the GCC military command. We generate enough revenue to both sustain the fleet and bring home wealth for our matriarchy to help reduce the taxes required to fund our internal programs. Wait, how does that work? Fearing that she may let something too personal slip, Sarah was glad to keep this new line of discussion going. It's part of the system related to the bounty Mikhail received. Axika replied while gesturing toward Mick, and then continued to cut up the last few bites of her steak to make it last longer. My fleet's cut of that bounty could entirely fund the next few dozen deployments. However, we are using the funds to both improve the fleet and invest in our matriarchy and people's quality of life. There are a massive variety of situations similar to that where a government, the GCC themselves, have problems that require solving. But they are either unable or unwilling to do so themselves. Either a government specifically will make a request and pay for a particular mission, or funds are provided from the GCC itself. So, y'all just go around killing eldritch space monsters and get paid for it. Mick's eyes had grown wide as he began thinking about living out more video game fantasies in real life. Kinda, but not really. Tense clarified for Axika, as she took a bite to avoid the question and be forced to make herself sound less cool. Like, we do fight the occasional pirate and slavers. This last deployment, we even ran a small campaign against some Chigagorians. But there's way more training, classes, and waiting for something to happen than actual fighting? Just like any other military. Sarah laughed as she thought about all the hurrying up and waiting she had done over the past 4 years. And that is why our accommodation section has grown in the way that it has. From her many years as the Admiral of the Hammer, Axika had hundreds of stories she could tell about the ways bored soldiers found entertainment. By providing safe and controlled facilities for my crew to relieve stress and boredom, it keeps them at their peak performance for when they're needed. Trying to keep the number of arrests in port down. Though Mick's joke caused everyone to laugh, Axika's chuckle was especially hearty. Barely. Mick and Sarah's translators picked up through the Admiral's laughter. Doesn't matter what you do, or what port it is, someone always manages to get themselves in trouble with local law enforcement. Every single time. I don't think something like that would be possible. Sarah was shocked to hear her commanding officer try to continue a mission that had already clearly failed. All of the information, regardless of whatever drive system was used, is beyond secure. I couldn't get access to it even if I tried. I don't think you understand the position you are in, Agent. The stern expression of the face being displayed on the screen implied the man considered that response to be insubordination. Your mission objectives were clear, and you are required to fulfill them per your contract. Sir, with all due respect, I am fully aware of the fact I am currently on an alien warship, surrounded by one of the most impressive military forces in the galaxy, and speaking on an unsecured line. Sarah hoped the general would be wise enough to recognize what she was trying to tell him. I was guaranteed that this line was secured by... The general was suddenly taken aback by the direct tone Sarah had taken with him before she cut him off. For diplomatic purposes, sir. Sarah clarified. They probably won't consider an intelligence operation to be covered under that diplomatic privilege. He is demanding results, and that is not up for debate, Agent. The now more aggressive tone coming from the man on screen suddenly reminded Sarah of what Gabriel had mentioned to her. That technology could disrupt the entire shipping industry, and you either need to get your hands on it or make sure that Marsgov doesn't. Your contract is dependent on it. If we do not get the results we expect, you can consider it, and your position terminated. And with that, the face on the screen disappeared, and Sarah was left alone with her thoughts. Though she had initially signed up for the Central Intelligence Division as a way to pay for college, things got far more complicated after a car accident killed her father and crippled her mother. Her father was the breadwinner for her family, and his job as a manager at the local shipwrights helped pay the cost of treatment and accommodations for her mentally disabled brother. Now that she was the sole provider for both her mother and brother, the potential loss of income and benefits would make their life far more difficult than it already was. After a moment of staring at the black screen, Sarah leaned forward, rested her elbows on the desk, placed her head into her hands, and began to cry. I'm sorry for interrupting, Miss McFree, but there is something I feel I am ethically bound to inform you of. The synthesized voice of the Hammer's controlling AI called out to Sarah in a way that was as comforting as hand being gently placed on her shoulder. The fool. The woman replied in shock to the dimly light, empty room. So yeah, we're listening. Oh, of course, Tylon replied, while the lights in the roof shifted slightly and the holographic projection of the AI's dragon-like form appeared on the other side of the desk Sarah was seated at. That was, quite obviously, not a diplomatic call. At this point, military command is concerned about your government. Or, more specifically, certain small parts of your government which seem to have no accountability. So what? Sarah asked while staring at the holograph, eyes still wet with tears. We are concerned. I am concerned for the safety of you and your family. Tylen's simple statement caused Sarah's expression to become much more suspicious. As part of the First Contact team, defined by the First Contact protocols for this particular event, you are guaranteed certain diplomatic protections. Protections which also extend to your direct family. Okay, but why are you telling me this? It's not like I'm in physical danger, just financial. Sarah tried to clarify, as she couldn't understand why Tylon was interrupting her with this. Are you sure about that? The holographic dragon's face showed an expression of concern. What the fuck are getting at? Been listening to Mick too much, yeah? Sarah knew her government wasn't great, and it had a lot of areas it needed to improve on, but she couldn't understand where any of this was coming from. I don't care what that commie says. Things aren't that bad. The dole is shit. But the hologram raised one of its claw hands to cut Sarah off, as it was obvious by the look on its face that Sarah wasn't getting what he was saying. In Sarah's personal experiences, while growing up in what she considered to be upper middle class, working family household, life on Earth really wasn't that bad. There may have been a lot of people who survived universal basic income, but there really weren't any homeless people or anyone starving, even on her family. Vacations to other countries, everyone seemed to have a decent minimum quality of life. If she lost her income and benefits from working for Sid, her family wouldn't starve, even if she had to stay home and take care of them both herself. Even though it would mean all of her dreams of one day becoming a space station administrator would be dead, neither she nor they would be. What I am about to share with you, I have only shared with a very limited number of people who absolutely need to know. As Tylon started to speak, the screen in front of Sarah came to life and began displaying an eyes-only classification marked file. I am not concerned about the minimum quality of life on your planet. I am solely concerned with the means by which your government enforces its control over its citizens. What the fuck is that? Sarah cut herself off as the shock of she was reading completely blindsided her. She knew her government did bad things, but not this. This has to be fake. I am so sorry. Tylon's holographic eyes showed the same pain that Sarah felt in her heart. But now I hope you understand where the concern comes from and why we are having this discussion. Why didn't Gabriel do anything about this? Sarah's voice had become completely despondent as she scrolled down and realized she wasn't the only person they had done this to. On the screen in front of her was a SID report concerning the success of manipulating the circumstances surrounding citizens attending Kaosu. Everything from car accidents, like the one her parents had been in, to outright kidnapping and direct extortion. Anyone who had signed up for government aid to attend the prestigious and open Martian university was considered a target of these manipulations. If Tylon could find this information in its completely unredacted state, then surely both Gabriel and President River knew about it too. Though Old Man River showing a relaxed attitude towards these 4 spies now made sense, the lack of response from Gabriel did not. He is currently occupied in his meeting with Mazer. Tylon began to explain in a tone which reflected Sarah's barely hidden rage. But he explained it to me like this. His options were either to rain fire and brimstone as judgment down upon the sinners, and most likely cause untold suffering to innocent people in the process, or to work behind the scenes to do what he could to reduce the harm. My Da is dead. My Ma will never walk again. The tears were once again streaming down Sarah's face as she slowly began to break down. I'll fucking kill the bastards with my bare hands. No. Tylon's voice came through. In a way. Through. Said he truly understood her rage. That would be too easy on them. What we will do is much worse. The Gardens of Deathworlders, Part 14. You knew about this the whole time. This mixture of pain, rage, and sadness in Sarah's voice was obvious. Why didn't you say something sooner? It hasn't even been 2 weeks, and we've both been busy. Mick wasn't really trying to defend himself from these questions. He just wasn't sure what exactly to say. When would I have even? It's been 4 fucking years, Mick. Sarah wasn't calming down, and Mick couldn't blame her. What would have happened? Mick's voice was as compassionate and direct as he could make it. If I had called you the week I got out of the hospital and told you I wasn't mad at you, because I knew what the tyrants did to you to make you hurt me, and that I had a team on standby, ready to extract your mom and brother to Mars at a moment's notice. The mixture of furious emotions on Sarah's face began melting away as her mouth fell open and her eyes grew moist. For a second, the redhead simply stared at the bearded man as the full implications of what he had just said slowly set in. The well-adorned meeting room the pair were standing in became silent for the first time in over an hour. The emergency diplomatic meeting Sarah called had quickly turned into a legal and tactical meeting concerning the safety of her family. However, it had taken almost an hour of discussion before Mick finally brought up the fact that MarsGov's intelligence agency was well aware of unease methodologies and had contingencies in place for potential defectors.